learned this morning that President Biden will be traveling to Maui this upcoming Monday in the wake of the island's devastating wildfires, per a CBS News report. The president spoke for the first time yesterday on the historic disaster, a full 8 days after the blaze first arrived.
Well, I got to talk a little bit about Hawaii. I've been on the phone with the governor coming up here and the senators. And let me say, address that devastating wildfires, some of which are still burning in Hawaii. They've claimed the lives of 99 people so far, and they haven't cleaned things up yet. The deadliest wildfire in more than 100 years. A whole city destroyed. Generations of native Hawaiian history turned into ruin. I've spoken to Governor Josh Green multiple times and reassured him the state will have everything it needs from the federal government. I immediately approved the governor's request for expedited major disaster declaration. That's a fancy word of saying whatever you need, you're going to get.
As of this recording, over 100 people have been confirmed dead and over 1,000 remain missing. Survivors are beginning to rebuild their lives and they're sharing their stories. One devastating account from the Associated Press reads, Mike Chikina and his wife took off their shirts, dunked them in water, and tried to cover their faces. Chikino ran up and down the seawall, shouting his lost dogs' names. He saw dead bodies slumped next to the wall. Help me, people screamed. Elderly and disabled people couldn't make it over the wall on their own. Some were badly burned, and Chikino lifted as many as he could. He ran until he vomited from the smoke, his eyes nearly swollen shut. For the next 5 or 6 hours, they moved back and forth between sea and shore. They crouched behind the wall, trying to get as low as they could. When flames fell from the sky, they dunked themselves into the water. Their surviving dog's fur was singed. Oof, some of these stories coming out of Maui are just so gruesome. I saw another one where a single man was running around and encountered a family, helped them hoist themselves over the wall, and they all kind of clung to what looked like a floating door in the water as they again tried to avoid falling bits of debris and smoke and fire, dunking their heads periodically where necessary, and clinging to that raft, that makeshift raft, for hours. It's a genuinely historic wildfire. The number of deaths, historic. And that is why there's been so much criticism of how the Biden administration's been handling this. We read up top that he's finally going to visit the island. But what we didn't say was that this was after he got a lot of criticism for going to Lake Tahoe. He will be cutting his Lake Tahoe trip short in order to go to Maui earlier than anticipated. Saying no comment and all that. Yeah, it seems like a real unforced error on his part. Obviously not, the perception of not responding to natural disasters well enough is something that can really hurt a president's approval numbers. And as you said, this is a really bad disaster, very unprecedented, just a tremendous amount of devastation and actually lives lost. A lot of times in these natural disasters, there is destruction, devastation, but because we live in a very modern society, our buildings are well built. People understand emergency proceedings. Sometimes, even though it looks really bad, there's still some loss of life, and it's very sad and regrettable. But it's not always the numbers don't come out as bad as they do in other places in the world. Here, these are some really, really bad numbers and horrific, obviously, death from fire, from burning, from smoke. Because it was so fast moving. And I also think there was this issue of being stuck on an island with limited points of egress. So many people, and there's been mixed advice about whether or not you should try other things before hopping into the water. But so many people seem to have been forced up against this seawall and having to choose wading, swimming, treading water in the sea because there was literally a firewall that they couldn't escape. Now, the actual mitigation that's being offered by the government here is specifically being criticized by a number of people. The administration announced that they were going to be paying $700 per affected household, a number that in light of recent stimulus checks and I think in light of other kinds of disaster relief, and particularly in light of the funds that are being sent to Ukraine, many are balking at. Senator Nina Turner from Ohio tweeted simply 700 with an exclamation mark and a question mark. A Politico story pointed out that Biden is seeking $40 billion in emergency relief for Ukraine, and people are making that comparison, pointing out that the Maui population is 165,386 people. Okay, fewer than 170,000 people. if every single person somehow qualified and managed to register for this one-time payment of $700, that's only $115,770,900. So that's 0.0029% of the latest amount that Biden is trying to send to Ukraine right now.
Yeah, I don't understand how people could be anything other than just like blithely furious at the idea, because there's no debate even over the Ukraine spending and funding. It's just automatic. It's just whatever they need, whatever they want. It's a blank check. They fill in the numbers on the check. And we are much more stingy when it comes to spending domestically, spending at home. Now, obviously, I am not a great advocate for spending more on any sort of domestic things, but you do have to feel cheated by the fact that your government is willing to spend any amount of money on foreign aid, on dubious foreign military policies, on weapons. We're wholesale sending weapons overseas. We don't know where they'll end up, or if the geopolitical situation will change and the people we're giving them to will still be our friends. In support of a country that has suspended independent media and rival political parties, and is doing all the hallmarks of illiberal actions being taken during this war effort. And it just seems like so I absolutely understand why people are saying this is a joke. $700 is a joke.
Where the money ends up is a really interesting point. One Twitter user, Apollo, said he can't believe this is a real story. Biden has provided billions to Ukraine, some of which Kyiv spent on hiring prostitutes for their injured soldiers, pointing to a BBC News story about the sex lives coming in focus for Ukraine's injured veterans. Tara Reid weighed in on all of this, pointing out to the hypocrisy and the gap, the $1.7 million for Maui versus $24 billion to Ukraine. Rob Schneider, the actor, got in on the action with one of these tweets of a similar vein, pointing out the billions of dollars of taxpayer money going to Ukraine versus the $1.9 million going to the Maui fire victims, saying, quote, Biden hates Americans. I mean, this is the kind of, this is a bipartisan critique here. Obviously, there's people like Rob Schneider on the right, people like Tara Reid on the left, many people pointing out that the government has demonstrated its ability to spend when it wants to, but the tragic circumstances of these American people out in Maui seem not to rise to the occasion.
Well, former President Barack Obama also weighed in on the tragedies in Hawaii. Let's watch.
Aloha, everybody. Like so many people around the world, Michelle and I have been absolutely heartbroken by the devastating images coming out of Maui and Lahaina over the last week. As someone who grew up in Hawaii, as someone who has taken my family to enjoy the incredible beauty of that island and the hospitality of the people of Lahaina, we now find ourselves mourning the lives that are lost, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the families that have lost so much. The thing about it is, though, thoughts and prayers in a moment like this are not enough. We have to step up, and we have to help those families, and we have to help Lahaina rebuild. And the good news is that the Hawaii Red Cross and Malama Maui are mobilizing to provide direct support to people who are desperately in need. I'm asking you to do everything you can to generously support the Malama Maui effort.
The Gray Zone's Max Blumenthal tweeted in response to Obama's message, the Red Cross raised $500 million for Haiti earthquake relief in 2010, spent 25% on internal administrative costs, built about 6 houses for Haitians, and refuses to say what it did with the rest of the money. And Michelle Obama helped lead their fundraising drive.
And I saw Susan Sarandon, actress, co-sign that sentiment, saying that was her experience with the organization as well. It's a real problem. And not to say that any one individual is responsible for an organization like the Red Cross's inability to trace where the money goes, but this is a huge problem with a lot of these NGOs that are paying 6-figure salaries to many folks that are administering these programs, and very little of the donations actually get through to the people in need. And it does seem rich for someone who was a president of the United States to be kind of prioritizing a humanitarian response as opposed to the federal government's response, when even if you are someone of your political orientation who does not love a lot of government spending, to the extent that there is a purpose for, like a fundamental purpose for the government, it is to respond in these instances of huge infrastructural failure and natural disaster. So,
I mean, I think it would be naive to think that there's no, internal oversight, bureaucracy, spending going on at like FEMA and other things like that. I'm sure it's similarly wasteful, but if you're going to have government spending, one of the best ways to avoid succumbing to that kind of thing, or just using the money best, is to just write checks to people, right? Is to just literally give people the money and let them decide how best it's used, rather than creating a very cumbersome, clunky organizational distribution mechanism. Like the more paperwork there is, the more bureaucracy it is, the more money you're wasting doing that, instead of just giving the money to people, many of whom are taxpayers, right, and pay into a rainy, to the extent the government is, some of what it does is as a rainy day fund to, as like a kind of an insurance thing to, pay out to people. We're not all going to be in a natural disaster, but we pay some amount of money so that you'll be, covered when you're there. And I think that those should be very transparent, and people should understand what they're paying into, and have it be voluntary to the largest extent possible. But just giving people the money. I
completely agree. I think that's true for a lot of government policies. The efficiency would be just to give people money. We saw it worked in the pandemic, but historically, folks are concerned that the money, if someone buys a meal that they don't approve of, if they stay in a hotel that they think is too expensive, they start to say, we want to police exactly how you spend these funds. And that's why we get so much means testing and, frankly, waste across our government, because somebody has to administer all the means testing that we do to make sure that no poor person or no person in need uses a dollar, not the exact circumscribed way that we seem to think, the people in charge seem to think that they should. So we'll see what happens. I'm glad that Biden is eventually going to be visiting the area, and hopefully some of this pressure forces the government to give them what they need. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.